just a minute here. So there was some IT problems, I guess, across both meetings that were held in here last week, so apologies to the public that that was a problem, but I've been told that it's been fixed, so.
Okay, great. Today is Monday, August 17th, 2020. It is 4 p.m. We're going to do a roll call. Emily Stacy, me chair. Amanda Bulris-Allen.
Here.
Tenzin Georgie is not here. Michelle Cromwell is not here. Maxine Perry.
Here.
Wilbur Brewer.
Yep.
Caprice Johnson. Hillard Rogers. Not here. Jamie Dothout. Not here. Police Chief Ritter.
Here.
Elizabeth Gibbs.
Here.
Wilbur Brewer. Oh, yeah, that's it. Okay. The approval of the minutes for the following meetings on August 10th, 2020. Motion to approve.
I'll make the motion.
I second
Second.
We need a second.
that. I second. Yep.
Will second.
Okay.
I'm gonna abstain, I wasn't here,
Okay.
and I couldn't hear it through the audio or visual.
Okay. So we'll do roll call. Do you want me to do roll call?
Okay.
Okay.
Did you get a copy?
I did, but I wasn't here, so.
I know.
Okay. So the roll call. Emily. So it's a yes or a no or abstain. Emily
Here.
is a yes.
Yes.
Amanda, you're going to abstain.
Correct.
Tenzin absent. Maxine?
Yes.
Yes. Will?
Yes.
Caprice?
Yes.
Chief Ritter?
Yes.
And I also vote yes, so motion carried.
The second item on the agenda is fill the vice chair. Motion to remove item 2 from the table.
I'll make the motion to remove it from the table. I need a second.
Second that.
Okay, so all in favor of removing the item from the table, we're gonna do roll call. Do you wanna do that, or do you want me?
Yes.
Okay, roll call. Emily? So this is a yes or a no on just removing the item from the table. Emily?
Yes.
Yes. Amanda?
Yes.
Maxine?
Yes.
Will?
Yes.
Caprice?
Yes.
Chief?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Okay, so that's all that we've done, is take the motion from the table. So now we are looking at the motion to nominate a vice chair. I would like to make a motion to nominate Amanda as vice chair.
A second?
Okay.
Have you agreed to it?
I did.
Oh.
Okay, so we'll do roll call. Emily?
Yes.
Amanda?
Abstain.
Abstain. Oh, Maxine?
Yes.
Yes. Will?
Yes.
Caprice?
Yes.
Chief?
Yes.
And I also vote yes, so that's adopted. So Amanda is now the vice chair.
Congratulations.
Thank you for stepping into that role.
Emily?
Adoption of survey questions, motion to remove item 3 from the table.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, roll call. That's a yes or no just on removing it from the table. Roll call. Emily?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
Maxine?
Yes.
Will?
Yes.
Caprice?
Yes.
Chief?
Yes.
And I will also vote yes. So action is adopted. It's removed from the table. Now we need a motion to actually adopt the survey questions.
Can we have some discussion?
Well, we have to put the motion, we have to make the motion and then we discuss, and then it's either defeated or not.
Okay, I'll make a
Okay,
motion
so leave
You make a
that.
motion for what?
to adopt.
Because we can't discuss it unless we bring the motion up. So I have a first by Levi. Do I have a second?
Second that.
Thank you. Now we'll have discussion.
I just wanted to say, I thought that Amanda did an amazing job in getting this to the point where it's at with everyone's feedback. I think that this is a good survey to put out there. Hopefully it's, the panel will get the data that it's looking for.
I agree.
I think
I
we
hope
have,
so too. I hope we get the data we're looking for. I find this to be very long, but it's a good document. And most of the time when you send this out to the public, long documents don't make it. But she's done a very good job with this, and some things in there I would have removed because I feel like it's just too long. So in the future, I would like to see us do a survey that's more geared to what we were assigned to do. And this is, getting the public's opinion somewhat. But I thought we went a little deep on that, and it should be shortened. But as a document itself, I think you've done a great job with putting that out for us.
So just to kind of, I guess, summarize, so the survey that you guys have in front of you is actually the print version of the survey. So it looks much longer than it actually is. On the Google form that will be used for the community, it actually, a lot of these questions, for example, number 1 says, how many years have you lived in the city of Plattsburgh? On this print form, it says mark one of the ovals. On the actual form itself is a drop-down menu. So it actually looks much smaller in a technology form than it does on paper. I brought the paper form specifically so that folks could have it in front of them. I know at the last meeting, I think I wasn't here, but that maybe folks didn't have an opportunity to review it, so that's why I brought it this way. There was some discussion on how we were going to get it out. And we did talk about the Google form, but also how we were also going to get it out to folks who don't have access to technology. And so, yeah, it's a little more lengthy, but we do plan on, the working committee plans on putting a distribution plan together that will include technology as well as looking at populations that may not have access to technology and how we might be able to include a diverse population of our community in the survey. Part of this was also looking at making sure we captured, that we didn't just capture people with just technology, or we didn't just capture a certain socioeconomic background, but that we are able to capture a good outlook of what the city of Plattsburgh looks like. So that's kind of, just wanted to throw that out there. I will mention that the working committee did have, Elizabeth was able to communicate with council regarding going door to door, and it was discouraged.
Well, it wasn't with the council, it was corporate council.
Corporate council.
So I'll read corporate council's response, because after our last meeting, I had a conversation with a couple of members of the audience who expressed a desire to be, become volunteers and help with surveying and collecting information. And we were concerned because, it's COVID, and what kind of liability is that? Is that a dangerous aspect? So Council Dean Schneller's response was to limit the city's liability primarily due to COVID, but also due to the unknown interactions which can occur with the door-to-door knocking campaign. I suggest the committee focus on virtual remote survey options. In addition, they could explore phone options, which I know is a possibility for us here. We just have to coordinate that with Beth Carlin. Placarding in public places, or mail options. So I really want to express my appreciation for the members of the public who expressed that they wanted to participate, but we have to go on the advice of council. So I think that we, as a group, can coordinate how are we going to get the survey out. How are we going to identify the groups that maybe don't have access to technology, all those things. And we had discussed at the last meeting that we were going to set a timeline of 4 weeks to get the survey out so that members of the community can fill those out, and then we will collate.
Right. And I spoke with Mark Hamilton, so did Elizabeth, and he's agreed. We normally do our surveys. We go, the maintenance delivers a survey to all the housing, and he is willing to do that if we need that done.
Fantastic.
And also coming into the office, they pay the rent. They can also pick up a survey there
Where? I'm sorry?
at the office.
At the office, okay.
Yeah. So he says yes, he would help us out with that. So he'll support us in that. Okay.
And Martin, I'm just curious about how many community members is that?
Oh God, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I think it's about
Over 1,000?
Close to 1,000, about maybe 850, something like that. I don't have the exact number in front of me.
It doesn't Plattsburgh Housing Authority house about 400 units?
Yeah, that's,
So if you, on average, about 1 to 2 people, that's close to 1,000.
well, I think it's 8 something, because I have to correlate that when I do my survey. And I have so many that go to certain areas. You know, you have the Sharon Avenue, and then you would have South Catherine and McGully. So, you know, all those combined, and each maintenance person normally take a bundle of them and deliver them. So it's really about a little over 800 and something. Pretty close to it.
So you can use maintenance to help you coordinate that?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
that's who delivers the service to each door.
Okay.
So, in relation to the discussion regarding the survey, I wasn't here at the last meeting and it was hard for me, I couldn't hear anything on the audio or, I would like for if the working committee could continue to work on a distribution plan and get that together for like maybe the next meeting on, okay, this is our distribution plan and let's move forward and get this done. We really need to have some outcomes related to this panel, and I think this is important for our community to see what the needs are moving forward.
I think that's a good idea, but the work committee has to also bring that back to the panel. So
Okay.
we're working as a group, we're not
Yeah.
working separately.
Oh, right.
Yep.
And individually, we're working as a group.
Yep.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
Right.
And do we have any further discussion on the survey? Okay.
Michelle, were you able to get the
It's-
copy? I know you came in
It's
late.
right here I actually set this up for you, Michelle, so there's an agenda and a Google, the hardcover.
Right here?
Yes, right there. We have some absent members tonight, so
Thank you.
you're welcome. Do we have any further discussion on the survey? Okay, roll call. Emily?
Yes.
Yes. Amanda?
Yes.
Michelle?
Present, please.
No, we're voting yes or no on adopting the survey.
Oh, say that again. What-
Oh, we're voting on whether or
I
not.
thought it was roll call.
No, no,
I
we,
thought were here.
no,
Okay.
no, we did roll call already, and I made a note of
So
that you
tune
were.
in, what are we doing?
We're voting on whether or not to adopt the survey as it exists.
All right, so can you come back to me?
I can, sure.
Thank you.
Maxine?
Yes.
Yes. Will?
Yes.
Priest?
Yes.
Chief Ritter?
Yes.
And Elizabeth votes yes. So this is the item we're voting on, Michelle. I need your yes or no.
Just taking a quick look again.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion passed.
And thank you to the working group. That's really
Well,
good.
thanks to the whole panel for your feedback and all the work that went into this.
So old business, first is the discussion of existing use of forest policy, continued.
So, I went through the document and I also compared it to your previous document, the previous policy. And there were a large number of additions to this current policy. Can you give the public kind of a general sense of what, I mean, I've read it, but what in your view has changed between these two documents when this was adopted, or amended, I should say, June 9th, 2020?
So, the policy that existed, that was instituted in 2007, was a somewhat of a model policy for 2007. And at that time, you know, it was probably at the leading, one of the leading edges of model policies. But in 13 years, a lot of transformation takes place, at least at the higher administration level. So the amount of police departments, major metropolitan police departments that have revised their policies through a couple of different ways, some through consent decrees and some voluntarily. But the major police departments, it looks a lot closer to what the 2020 policy that I put in place is. So right from the get-go, you can see that there are 5 definitions in the 2007 policy, and they're penal law definitions. So the definition of physical injury, physical force, reasonable belief, the standard for an arrest. In the 2020 policy, the very first definition is the sanctity of human life. So it takes a very different approach to what the policy is leading with. It's the value of human life. You know, it's acknowledging that the police are authorized to use force in certain instances, but it has to be balanced on what's reasonable and necessary, while still taking into account the value of human life. So it does come from, it is very overt in that sense. But through the rest of the policy, it just expands more on certain applications. So most notably would be the absence of whatever definition is used, a chokehold. So, you know, that being not included as an authorized, and it technically wasn't an authorized use of force in the previous one, but it explicitly puts out there
Right.
in the new policy.
Right, that was a big change, I know.
Right.
Um,
So that was probably I wouldn't say it's the biggest one. It's one of the glaringly obvious changes. One of the things that has been introduced in policies from 2007 to 2020 is the inclusion of a, get the right. Defining certain levels of force. In the previous policy, it almost mirrors directly what is the usages in the penal law that is the defense of justification. They're hard to understand. Police departments have narrowed down these into bigger categories, more restrictive categories, because, for instance, for a police officer to, in a moment where deadly force is creeping into the possibility, to know that, well, arson first is an authorized offense to use deadly force under certain conditions. I mean, to take all those things into context, but that's the way the penal law is written. Here are the offenses that are qualifying offenses where you may use deadly force. And it just needs to be simplified. I mean, we're talking about deadly force where you would want the most constraint. So what it does in the new policy is it does summarize it a little better, where it includes levels. So I would say it's easier for a person to group certain things in a certain level. So it would be certain hands-on use of force, so compliance techniques, or just a hold in an arrest situation. And then it graduates into a higher level where intermediary weapons are used, strikes, less lethal uses of force. I say less lethal as in the the instrument that's used, not that it's, in some cases it is lethal, but how it's categorized as an instrument. And then the highest level would be uses of force that would fall into explicitly deadly force.
So are you, excuse me, I'm sorry. Are you talking about the, like, you've got level 1, level 2, level 3?
Level 1, level 2, and level 3.
Yeah, okay.
So, the first one is strikes to the head, sternum, spine, groin, or kidney area with an impact weapon. That reasonably would cause serious physical injury. Now, that may be not deadly force, but in terms of what kind of physical injury, serious physical injury could cause death. So that's why a serious physical injury, something that a reasonable person would know, if I take a flashlight and I smash it on someone's spine, that can do a lot of damage. So not to arbitrarily say, well, if you do this, then that, but it's trying to get more of a collective sense of these things should be used in certain instances, and they better be really serious where you're in defense of your life or another person's life. I mean, that's just as plain as you can make it. So when things are chaotic, you're not trying to think about the formula of arson first and then outside, so it gets clunky, so.
So you're thinking which of these 3 categories would this situation fit in?
Yeah, so I mean,
Essentially,
if
I'm
you were
not
gonna
sure.
train somebody to be able to react very quickly under different circumstances entirely. So one is where just as a matter of being able to put your hands on somebody, but not necessarily in a way where you're applying force, but just moving somebody along. And then into a case where you're using force to gain some sort of compliance that would be short of serious physical injury. So that's really the delineator. So serious physical injury, death, deadly force, and then physical injury. And then absent, what someone reasonably would, like if I grabbed you by the wrist, it reasonably should not cause physical injury. But if I were doing something differently and you were pulling away, potentially there's a physical injury component. So
Plus the size of the person that you're dealing with and.
these
and-
all take
right.
into,
The
yes.
totality of circumstances,
For
which is
sure.
I guess the next part of the policy, right?
So that's, if we're getting down to like the meat of the use of force policy and how it changes differently, that's probably the biggest one. That they call it a use of force continuum, is what
Continuum?
this.
Continuum?
Continuum.
Okay.
Yeah. Chief, can I ask a question?
Please.
And just in terms of tactically, right? So we're talking about the use of force. Where does de-escalation fall into that continuum? Because I know it does.
It's the same thing I was gonna
So
ask.
as I hear, we're talking about force, I'm seeing the continuum almost from 0, and then you have on the other end of 0, that's the de-escalation, and then you have use of force above 0. So where does de-escalation fall into the use of force? Because the definition is there in the policy on the first page, but I'm not seeing it as so just help us to understand where does it fall into the continuum? Because as we're doing the training about use of force, that seems to be almost like a last resort. Even if you're seeing somebody about to burn a building down, can you de-escalate before you use force?
So that really depends on the situation. I would say that if someone is getting ready to throw a lit Molotov cocktail into a building, it might not be possible or reasonable based on the imminency of what could potentially happen in that outcome. That if there is somebody inside a building and a person is using that kind of device, we're talking about at the very top of the spectrum. that depending on those circumstances, which is kind of hypothetical, de-escalation may not even be appropriate at that point.
Right, but I'm just wondering if, as we enter this conversation about the use of force, where does the de-escalation lie? Where is it a part of the conversation, intentionally and actively? Is my question making sense?
Yes.
Yes, it's making
Yep.
sense, because I was gonna ask the same question.
So I think I kind of know where you're getting at. So I just thinking from the perspective of where I come from. So I come from the mental health world, and so you guys, city police, often get calls from our folks that are potentially a danger to self or others. So in those situations, de-escalation is where it starts. Could you start maybe how you might? Because I've seen your men and women on the scenes with some of our folks for hours, convincing them that they need to seek treatment and getting them to the hospital, what that looks like versus just going in, cuffing them and getting them to the hospital. Could you explain maybe, is that kind of what you're talking about, Michelle?
And I think that's one scenario, but when we think about the ways that people's identities intersect, right? When
Yep.
there's intersectionality. So let's just say that, another scenario, all right, I'd use race and mental health, because
Yep.
those are ways that people can intersectionally be oppressed.
And language
A mother
barriers.
finds their son banging his head on the wall, doesn't know what to do, doesn't know who to call, calls the police. The police comes and sees, this young, big, black man carrying on erratically, right? Where is that continuum of use of force and de-escalation where it comes in?
So this is on a side where at the forefront of this would really fall into the de-escalation side of the equation.
Right.
So we're talking about the absence of a serious felony. Using arson first is a horrible,
Yeah.
a horrible example to use for where de-escalation might be appropriate. I think de-escalation might be appropriate on the bulk of things, but only if it's even warranted. And here's what I mean by that. To say that there is going to be a confrontation every single time and de-escalation would be required every single time doesn't really give a true sense of what kind of interactions we have.
Right.
I would say not a lot of circumstances get to a point where de-escalation might even be appropriate. Where if I'm talking to you and we're just talking, would we need to have de-escalation as a tool?
Right.
It probably not. So de-escalation is going to be something that is very appropriate when there's a crisis.
But not only when there's a
So-
crisis, but
Outside of that.
outside of the crisis situation, I think there is a room for de-escalation
All the time.
all the time.
So yes,
And let me just finish my last thought and
Yeah,
then. So if we look at the core principles, because I'm thinking operationally and functionally. So, we also say that the core principle, one of the core principles is the sanctity of human life, and that's the first one. So I always go back to core principles, right? Core values. If this is what we believe in, therefore this is what we will use to always practice what we do functionally and operationally. So I think a part of I feel our role is to call into question how we are enacting those core principles. And if the sanctity of human life is a core principle, then we would always have that as the core foundation. Does that make sense?
so as you're speaking, that's what I was coming back to, is that I guess when I hear de-escalation, it means to me that we're already at here and we should just always that we're already escalating. I don't believe that it's always escalated, that we would try to de-escalate a situation, because it might not be escalated. But I would come back to say, I think that our baseline should be somewhere where it does mirror how you would act in a de-escalation situation. I get what you're saying.
And that's good language, and that should be the baseline, that we
Yes.
always
So-
go back to something.
It should be here anyway, instead of, we're always gonna de-escalate a situation that might not need to be de-escalated.
I'm just reviewing, so I think some of us, maybe going back to like what we term de-escalating, so I'm looking at like your term
Yeah.
of de-escalating is different than what I would call de-escalating. So that might be where I think,
I would agree with that too. There is one section in here that does get a little bit, it does have more on de-escalation, but obviously, in other major metropolitan police department policies,
Excuse me.
they have entire policies on de-escalation. So understand that this is a starting point.
Right.
This
Yes.
is, if we're gonna talk about use of force, it has to include de-escalation as one of the ideals. But
And on
this
that
is,
continuum.
right, but this addresses more, it's more heavy on the use of force practices. But de-escalation is included in this for the purpose of, it is not in the previous policy.
Right, and I think.
Explicitly stated like that.
And that we've seen a nice gap that we can then look at and say that this is something that we can work on, because we're seeing there needs to be
So
more
that,
pulling out and meeting out of this idea of de-escalation.
so this is just the starting point for ultimately what will be more hopefully.
As the baseline.
Yes.
I like that language. And you were trying to get us.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, some use of force continuums are a little bit more lengthy, they can be up to like 5, and there's a lot more information. But I can see where it looks like it goes from an officer arriving onto the scene to attack mode. That's the way that it looks. And that's not necessarily the case, but I think what you were trying to convey to earlier was that, when there is a threat of imminent danger, you don't have that time to sit there and think about what you're gonna do. And I think that's probably more of what this use of force is for, that imminent danger. Someone pulls a weapon out, or you come to a scene, you've got 2 people who are, I don't know, bleeding and fighting, and you don't know if there's any weapons there, and you have to act quickly. So,
Yes.
those type of scenarios are very appropriate for this type of, model, for the 3 levels, because in that situation, but then there's this shade of gray, right? Where, it may look like it's one thing, but it may not be, and I think that's kind of. maybe
And
where-
that's why they get training, so they can
Right.
kind of, weigh the situation and everything doesn't fall into place like it should.
Right.
But you hope you have those officers trained well enough.
But you also have to be a good decision maker.
Right.
Because that is the factor in all of this. You can be
That's right.
trained and trained and trained. But if you're not the best decision maker, able to take what is unfolding in front of you and make a sound decision
Right.
based on policy and
Right.
training,
And
you're never, you can be trained
all the
forever.
time, but at least they have that basic training.
Yes.
Because you
Yes,
need some
absolutely.
training. And what I say,
wholeheartedly agree.
yeah, and in some instances, I think language barriers have a lot to do with it. We
Yeah,
deal with
I
a
mean-
lot of people that have that language barrier, and it seems like it escalated and it isn't, just trying to get their point over.
absolutely.
Yes.
We have all those scenarios, and so it's just a different type of thing for all the officers that go into these type of situations.
Chief Ritter, back to your point here about, and I totally agree, about being a good decision maker.
Mm-hmm.
How can I word this? Is this part of the screening policy of when cadets are in training to determine Or is there, a point after cadet training and you have a sworn officer, is there a screening, monitoring, mentoring process of any kind so you can identify the officers you have that perhaps lack good decision-making? Perhaps they know the law, but they are not good decision-makers. Do you have any way to actively screen them, either when they're cadets, when they're officers, do you understand what I'm trying to get
I
at?
do.
Because the screening process has to be part of this as well.
Right.
Because you could be a highly trained person, but a terrible decision maker.
Mhm.
And back to
Yeah.
your point, Emily, when you talk about coming to a scene, no matter what that looks like, perhaps you have somebody with a language barrier, or there's race, or whatever the situation, that is a huge component to this.
I would agree.
And
Yeah.
so I just wondered, what can you tell us about how you screen for that, if you can tell us?
So probably lesser in the sense of what you're asking as far as in a real world scenario, decision making. In the police academy, we try to replicate it as best as possible with different training. But it isn't always going to replicate real time.
Yes, I know.
So in some ways, yes, as best as we can in a training environment. But really, it's the several 6 to 8 month field training program where an officer that has not yet been given the green light to make decisions on their own is with an officer for their entire shift. So that way we can closely monitor. I mean, you can't 100% monitor, but the absent an imminent decision that wouldn't have, like, if you and I are out doing something, you may be distracted that I might not be able to oversee. But that would be a very limited capacity. But that is part of the reality, is that you can't 100% control every decision, even in a monitoring situation. But that's the process.
But I think you can reduce the severity of some of the things that have gone on.
Yeah, so I
And-
mean, so day one, you don't even get to drive the patrol car. Like, you're just watching.
Right.
Because we can't trust that you can make these real world decisions. We know that you know the law. We know that you can wear a uniform correctly.
Mm-hmm.
We know that you can qualify with a handgun. We know that you have read all our policies. But when someone comes up to you and lies to you, or tries to deceive you,
Manipulate you.
right, you need, or tries to instigate something.
Right.
You need to know that that person is going to act appropriately. So it's, you just watch. And over time, they get to see it in real time, how a different officer that has more time on, who has gone through the same training program it's standardized, but it is also unique to each individual and each training officer. So we do rotate training officers, so you don't just get the one person that does it the one way. We try and have different influences that are positive to give the training the trainee more perspective.
I didn't know that.
So
And that's good then.
Yeah.
So over time, as they prove that they can make certain decisions, they get more responsibility, up to the point where they are released from field training and they can ride solo. And usually they can't take overtime until they are released from field training.
Right. I like your training when you have the different trainings for the cadets. with different agencies and they do role play
Yes,
and things like that. And that is very helpful, especially in the domestic violence scenario, that they get to see, you know, how some police act so different than others when they encountering two individuals in a domestic violence situation.
right.
So I
So-
think that is good to have that training. And you still do that, don't you?
So actually this week they're doing mental health training. With
Good.
Bonnie Black and a couple of other
Uh-huh,
people that
yeah.
have been doing this for a long,
A long time, and we did a long time at our office before I retired. But-
Yep.
But that's a good way to help the new cadets see firsthand how some things are done.
But that's another case where we have role players come in
Yeah.
and try and replicate certain,
Right.
certain things that would be of a training value.
Yeah.
I don't think that they did the
I always thought that was a good training
So
model.
in the police academy, there's a certain curriculum, so it's a certain amount of hours that's required. I don't know off the top of my head, but they break it up into different blocks. So it's not just, you get it 3 days in a row and then it's on to the next thing. They kind of layer it so it is somewhat fresh over a longer period of time.
So I was just curious, going back to the policy, because we were talking about the de-escalation, and I saw the words patience being used.
Yeah.
As, I think it was patience and flexibility, and there was one other, 3 words as like the core of the de-escalation process. So in relation to training, what sort of trainings or opportunities are available for the officers, not just new cadets, but officers on an ongoing basis, to ensure that they remain compassionate and empathetic as they do this really tough and challenging work that in many cases can make them very hardened at heart? I hate to say it that way, but I see it that way. And so what trainings are available, or what, you know, how do they get that experience so they're not being burnt out, they're not having, you know, they're not less compassionate, they're not less empathetic, so that when they go into those situations, it's not de-escalation at first, but it is being able to have
Your
this
baseline
human to
is
human conversation of like, hey, what's going on? How can I help you? Rather than automatically going, it's us versus them.
Right.
I'm
And
not,
you're speaking about that sensitivity.
I'm not aware of any traditional training like that.
Mm.
That's something to think about.
So-
Chief Ritter and I've had these conversations over and
So,
over again.
so would you say that that's a challenge within
We
your
work very closely with
particular,
the police.
Field, yes.
Yeah.
in your field, but also
Not anymore,
within
not
maybe
much
your, like the city of Plattsburgh? Do you think in general that's something that your officers could benefit from?
I don't see any negative to it.
Right, because you're talking about affect, right? You're talking about that affective piece.
Yeah,
And very
absolutely.
often we talk about in training, people become aware, but awareness doesn't help. We want that sensitivity because we want them to be able to see this person that they're dealing with, regardless of what they're presenting, first, as another human being. And it's that deep sensitivity. So I think we talked about this in some of our conversations, and if we can get to do some of that in Plattsburgh, we will start seeing that people have different experiences. Because some of the police departments that bring in that, and you can call it all sorts of different things.
Right.
If it's restorative but that affective piece, right? And they're connecting this and this. Yeah, you're gonna do that when you need to, but that's like down the line.
And I know that you actually, to just throw this out for the city of Plattsburgh, and I think this is a benefit, the city of Plattsburgh Police Department sent one of their police officers to the recovery coach training that was offered here in Clinton County. And so we do have a police officer at the city of Plattsburgh that's trained in a 40-hour recovery coach model, which is really that person-to-person contact, meeting people where they're at. But more of them need to be trained in that type of model, because it really is about creating, you know, an opportunity to have an empathetic, compassionate, relationship with folks, so that we don't have to get to a point of de-escalation or deadly force. We are able to be seen as helpers.
Definitely.
So
A
one,
non-traditional training used in a very specific way.
Mhm.
and the other thing that I become concerned about as well, and this goes into like the training and so on, is burnout within your police department with officers who will no doubt be internalizing trauma that they see. And I don't know, and so you can answer this, I'm sure, if there's anything like that right now for your officers, any kind of confidential resources for them if they have come to a traumatic scene of any kind. And we can all think of all those scenarios that I'm talking about. Is there something for them to help them with processing their trauma? Because trauma will become internalized, and then, when we know this, and you know, mental health professionals, you know this, it will become internalized, and then it's going to come out in some other way. And I wonder if you have anything like that available for your officers now.
In certain capacities, yes. I would say that we have always had access to the Employee Assistance Program. That is confidential, it's at no cost.
Employee Assistance Program, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Employee assistance, yeah.
It is confidential, however, it is voluntary. That's really the challenge with the question that you asked. It's
And-
very difficult to force somebody to do something in terms of acknowledging trauma, especially with, so if we're talking about the field of work that I work in.
Mhm.
Can you, and perhaps this becomes a bargaining unit question,
Right.
can mandatory counseling become something that happens, or does that become an item of collective bargaining for your officers?
It really, if you're talking about trying to help somebody, like, I don't think it's a bargaining unit issue. It's, if I told you to do something that you didn't want to do, would you go, okay, well, he knows better, I'm gonna do it? Like, you're gonna be fighting, especially if you're trying to deal with a horrific vision of something in your head that you can't sleep at night because of. Like,
Well,
They're-
especially because if you've got an incident that's happened and your officers respond, and the next incident that they have to address that is similar to something they've already encountered, I would see that as a triggering mechanism for perhaps some reactions that they didn't necessarily expect.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, perhaps de-escalation training might become null and void because you've internalized trauma, and maybe you just don't know how to process all of it at once, all the simultaneous processing that's going on.
If I told them they had to eat 3 square meals a day with, 30% carbs, 40% protein, and 30% fat, because it's healthy for them, I don't know what the adherence would be. So you cannot legislate completely things like that.
Right.
Strongly encourage.
Right.
I can tell you when we have really, really traumatic scenes, we are talking to people. And we are talking to the people that they're going to talk to behind closed doors. But for me to come in and say, everybody's gonna sit in a room and we're all gonna talk about our feelings. That's,
Well, wasn't there,
I
wasn't
don't
there,
think that's what you meant.
well, you're talking
No,
about a
that's
debriefing for a
No, I'm
traumatic
not
scene.
talking about a debriefing.
wasn't
I'm
there a
talking
peer-led
about,
support group though? So, at one point in time, I had conversations with Scott Beebe recently.
Yeah.
Who indicated that at one point in time under his leadership, he sent a few of you, or he was part of some
I
sort
was
of.
that person.
Okay, that, you were that person. There was, to a peer-led trauma training.
I went to Utica for 3 days.
But I think Elizabeth was speaking to if there is a traumatic incident, that there is some mandatory counseling, it could be one-on-one.
Right.
And maybe I look at too much,
No.
SVU and.
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean.
No, that's
I can-
exactly what I'm talking about. That
Yeah.
becomes a confidential situation, but
Mandatory.
Yes.
mandatory. Because if you see someone you've known for years in your department and you see them, you know, just out of control, you can mandate them to, right?
Sure.
They're not gonna
So-
respond. They're gonna, if you so I don't know what that trauma training, peer-led trauma training was, but people are more likely to hear from their peers that, hey, like, I've experienced that too, or hey, like, that affected me too. Like, they're more likely to hear from their fellow colleague than they are from a
So,
provider.
so Amanda hits the nail right on the head. Peer support is the model.
Okay.
Mandating someone to go to a counselor is not as effective because,
Yeah, I didn't,
especially within the police field,
right. We don't say it's,
we just see statistically they're going to talk or they're going to establish a rapport with somebody
right.
that is also a police officer or in the law enforcement.
Well, that's true, but I'm saying if you do see that, do you have room to say they have to go?
Yes, I mean.
And
we're
because I'm not
talking about-
saying that everybody that gets out of control, you have to demand them to go to a program. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, do you have the authority to say,
So
Yeah.
in this case,
Uh-huh.
yes. But as just a blanket, if you are on the scene, you must go. I don't.
no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
No.
So you can only do it if you see something that warrants an intervention. Am I capturing that correctly? Like, it can't be arbitrary. Would you have to see evidence of?
I would think it would be a lot more hands-on than just somebody saying, like if someone said, I think this person is drinking on the job, and okay, I smell alcohol, and I'm gonna order a breath test. Like, I don't think it's as arbitrary as that. I think if we're gonna be monitoring the people that were involved in this from the start, we're gonna be closely watching how they're acting, talking to their friends and saying,
Right.
how are they outside of work? You know, this is more into the monitoring of it. To where if it gets to a point where we do recognize, all right, this person is now potentially a problem at work with decision-making based on this. You
Right.
know, that does become more of an avenue for an intervention.
Right.
So
That's
it
what
would
we're
be
talking
a
about.
consistent pattern of that behavior, not just in work, but outside of it as well, to formulate
Yeah,
what
I
your
mean,
next course of action will be.
That's the unfortunate side of it, is that it doesn't stay at work.
Right, right.
I mean,
Right.
this is
You got a person that's
the-
out of control, is
And
own
trauma
work
is different.
and community.
Yeah.
Right?
For
People-
sure.
People respond to trauma differently, and you
Mhm.
might not be seeing something that's very overt, but it's
Some
there.
people are out of control, some people are very reserved.
Very controlled, yes.
So going
What
back
time
to
we got?
peer support,
It's almost 5.
is that something
It's
that
4:53.
that you tried and just there wasn't interest, or was it like, I'm just curious because yeah, that is the model, like, just curious if that's something that, you know, could be helpful.
So, we do have a couple of officers, one in particular that is more of a contact point for this type of outreach. There are a couple of things prior to COVID that he was involved in that was really getting us in the direction of making this a little bit more expansive. The state police have a very, very robust peer network. That would be a very useful tool if we had a serious traumatic event, or even a minor traumatic event, like any sort of traumatic event where we thought that maybe an officer is gonna experience this. So there was a foundation out in the Lake Placid area that it sounds a little weird, but a private donor has a farm where they have horses, and they do recovery training with law enforcement with horses. It's pretty amazing stuff. So he was able to participate in this and start in the the track for being a part of this training as well. But sadly, things change. But this is where that specific officer was going to start,
That's why the air conditioner's not. Sorry.
was trying to incorporate our department into this on a larger scale. But
Is that the program that they use for veterans?
it's the Snow Slip Foundation.
The what?
Snow Slip,
Can you spell that?
SNOWSLIP.
Okay, just
I
like I
believe
heard
it's out
it.
of
Like I
Wilmington.
said.
Just like it sounded, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Snow Slip Foundation, is that what you
Yes.
said? Okay.
And who sponsors that, do you know?
Well,
It's-
being that it's a very wealthy person that gives back,
Oh, okay, so it's
it's part of that,
community and,
but it has an involvement with DCGS, which is
oh,
where
DCJS, yes,
we
okay.
have an organization that oversees us, and if they kind of co-sponsor it,
Uh-huh.
it's something that we can definitely put our force behind. So at the point where, like the mid to late last year, DCGS was becoming involved with it. And so the hope was that they were going to make it more of a statewide thing.
They were becoming involved in this snow slope one?
In the
In the programming?
in the program, because it's a little bit different than traditional peer training.
Are you still involved with OPDD
Emily.
for
It is
training?
4:57.
As far
Should
as,
probably move on.
Albany, the state program, Stop Domestic Violence. They used to come up, Bob used to come up for OPD training.
so they, in the police academy, yes.
Mhm.
As far as, really, it's only when updates occur that there would be a training requirement.
Okay,
Like when they update the domestic incident reports, or there are specific laws that take effect that very much change how we would procedurally do things.
okay. Because I know they used to come up and do training out of Albany for you.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, are they still doing that?
I believe so.
Okay.
It's,
Yeah, we have to move on.
Okay.
So we're gonna continue this discussion when we meet again. The next item on the old business is the discussion of how to widely distribute the survey in the community. I think we kind of covered that,
We kind of
so
covered that
we
already.
did.
we can skip that. So under new business, we have panel openings. Bob has left our group after last week's meeting. We received an email from Bob, myself, Elizabeth, and the mayor, that he was no longer able to be on the panel. We'd like to formally wish Bob well. I guess, you know, he had some things come up this summer, wanted to see his family and kids, and with the audio, it just wasn't really working out. So, we should have a, answer about last week's discussion in regards to, the deadline that we had put forth to the mayor for the panel, and we should have somebody we should know by next meeting, maybe?
I would hope so. So, the procedure is, we put together the deadline of, August 14th at midnight. There were 5 interested people who submitted, and those names have been submitted to the Governance, Strategy, and Operations Committee. They're gonna pick 2 people, and those 2 people will be brought forth by resolution to be approved by the Common Council, and I'm hoping that will be done this week. So hopefully by next meeting, we will have 2 people.
Your turn, Amanda.
My turn, okay. So we're doing this a little different tonight. So tonight's public comment will be limited to the last 10 minutes of the meeting. We apologize for any inconvenience this might cause for those who have prepared statements. There is a meeting right after this meeting, so we do have to be in the room. For folks to know, in the future, the panel has decided that public comments will not be offered at every future meeting of this panel, but meetings that will be set aside for public comment will be posted on the City of Plattsburgh website 1 week in advance of the said meeting. Additionally, on your agenda, did everybody get an agenda? On the agenda, we have an email address for anybody who would like to provide public comment. And the email is cityinfo@plattsburghcitygov.com. And please feel free at any point in time to send any public comment to that email as well.
Right, and then what will happen is we can read those public comments out during our meeting so that the public's comments can be heard.
Yep.
Okay, with that said, let's open up for public comment. Public comment is 10 minutes total, limited to 2 minutes per speaker. The public will address the panel, not single members or personally attack members of the panel.
So just to verify, they would be, anything sent in is read by the panel?
Yes.
Like, okay.
Yes.
Just making sure.
Yes.
I know you're not supposed to address anyone personally, but it's a positive thing. One, I wanted to thank you, Michelle, for your comments about de-escalation. I think that is a very important topic. I feel a little uneasy, the response to it, that it's apparently not a top priority. I would argue that in the case of someone with a Molotov cocktail, that yes, you would try to de-escalate first, because that's just human nature and that's how you deal with people. But also, after hearing Amanda, that beautiful comment you made about becoming jaded, making sure that people stay true to reallocated to giving to NAMI. NAMI could put on some fantastic trainings on how to deal with people, because simply learning how to deal with people is a very, very important thing that a lot of people don't understand. I also wanted to come up and comment because I work with, as I said before, I work with a manufactured housing community, and I met with them this weekend, and I asked them as we had this group meeting, what do you guys think about the police? Do you want to make comments on them? And everyone's like, yes, 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 because they've had a lot of police presence. And some have been talking about how they've been treated poorly. Some have been, as people have been arrested, somehow they felt like they weren't being taken seriously when they were broken into. I'm sure others have plenty of positive comments. I don't know if that head shake was in, sympathy or not believing them, because many have a tendency to not believe people in poverty, but that is an example of work that we're doing. I'm door to door in this large community of 50, 60 households, going door to door, talking to everybody face to face and trying to get their input on things. And as school comes back, going to be going door to door, talking to people, with college kids, maybe not door to door, but meeting with college kids in certain capacities to be like, hey, so what are some of your concerns as we're trying to reach for racial equity? What do you want to see? How do you feel you're being treated? Not necessarily by the police even, but we're out there doing that work anyway. And that's why we've kind of offered support, because we're doing this stuff anyway. And I don't know if you're in charge of the working group and if you want to talk later at some point. Although again, I know there's not we're, super loved here. And yeah, so we are always willing to help because we want to see the best for the community, the best for what's going to represent. And simply just hearing some of this stuff, and now I'm wondering, talking about mental health, is there a policy about mental health? Because there's 80 policies. I don't particularly remember seeing one. So if a officer is acting erratic, there should be a policy, right?
It's been 2 minutes.
One day I should time myself so I can
It's okay.
stop having to make you interrupt me. But
That's okay. No, go and
thank
finish
you.
your statement if you want. I'm sorry.
Oh, no,
I just
but
wanted-
that's it. I'm curious about if there's a policy about that, because there should most definitely be a policy. But thank you to Amanda and Michelle in particular. I really appreciate what you guys said.
Any other members of the public?
Take my mask off to speak this time. Aubrey Frenier.
Aubrey, I'm sorry, I always put you down as Aubrey Eldridge in our minutes.
Yeah,
Do you
so
want
I'm
me to-
married, and I just, on my paperwork, it's still legally Frenier, so I don't know either to say Frenier or Eldridge. I go back and forth.
Which
so
do
I'm
you
sorry.
prefer for official minutes?
Probably Eldridge. Sorry.
It's okay, I just want to be sure.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
Okay, you're good. So, the last meeting, held on 8/10/20, August 10th, the panel had approved those minutes for the last 4 meetings. They say they have been approved, you said that they have been approved, but they're still not posted to the city's website?
They are.
Okay, I'm trying to find them. And then also, I wanted to comment on, last meeting, you said that you would make it public that the deadline for the panel, someone to submit a position on the panel to be the 14th, Friday. I couldn't find that on there. It said August 3rd it was posted.
So that was actually a request from our
The mayors.
committee to the city to let them know that is the deadline, because we do need to move forward. So it's not something that we would publicly put out there.
Well,
That's
actually, I did.
Did you?
Yep, on the floor of
Okay.
the council meeting on Thursday, I made that public statement.
Okay, yeah, I didn't see that. I just went to like the Public Safety Committee seeking panel members, so I saw just the original one for August 3rd. But, and then I just also wanted to ask too, I was curious how this public comment I see has been changed to 10 minutes limit. I know open meeting law, I'm trying to understand, is that a violation to only allow public comment? Or you said something about 1 week, giving a 1 week reminder?
No, so public we're not really supposed to engage with the public, so I'm sorry.
Okay,
We're
sorry,
gonna-
you
No,
don't
that's
answer
okay, I'm gonna
questions,
answer your
but-
question because I'm sure everyone in the room, if that's okay with the chair, I should actually
Yes,
defer to the
yeah.
chair. Is that okay with you if I address
Yes,
her?
that's
Okay.
fine.
Open meetings law states that we have to conduct our business that, like, for example, we're making decisions this evening, that has to be done in full view of the public.
Yeah.
We have to conduct the business, we're having this long drawn-out conversation, that's our business.
Right.
That has to be done in full view of the public, which means we allow the public to come in, they're invited to watch.
Right.
Because and I had a long conversation with our corporate counsel about this because it came up very early in our process in June. Because we're a panel, we're not the city government's common council,
the
for
city
example.
council.
We're a panel that's empowered to look at policy procedure and make recommendations. We are not required in any way to allow public comment. We're not. We are doing our business in full view of the public. We've gotten up and running much more smoothly. We had a kind of a bumpy start there at the beginning, trying to figure out like how are we going to get agendas and minutes and so forth up and posted. And we're just continuing to try and get through those little bumps on the way.
Yeah.
So what the panel is supposed to be doing while we're here in full view of the public is to work on what the resolution and what the governor's executive order is tasking us with, which is exactly what we did tonight. We had a great conversation about use of force, and there's so much more that we still need to talk about. So this is where the public comes to watch. And it will be a panel decision about how we want to engage with the public. So when I reached out to Beth Carlin and I asked her for some kind of city website access, this is what she shared with us, and it's on the agenda, which should be posted on the website, because I asked Beth to do that. So cityinfo@plattsburghcitygov.com will be the place where anybody in the public can submit comments. Those will probably be funneled to me, because I'm a city employee, and then we can read them out. And I know that it's probably very disappointing
Yeah.
that the public wants to be able to speak every single time, but we are very far behind where we really should be at this point. And for tonight's meeting, we actually need to be off this live stream in about 6 minutes because it's being used for another meeting. And it's an abbreviated meeting, which means if we allow 20 minutes, that's another 10 minutes or maybe even 20 minutes away from the work. So we're not eliminating it.
Right.
I want to make that clear.
Yeah.
We're just going to change when we do it and how, so that we can maximize our work time to get moving farther along in the process to the point where we've reviewed policies and procedures and we can now come down to start making recommendations. Because the panel has to come up with the decisions, on policy that then have to be opened up for the public for comment and feedback, and then have to be submitted to the council for action, and then the council will need to make decisions about what happens next, especially if anything impacts budget. So I do apologize if it seems like it's unfair, but we're trying very hard to accomplish a very heavy lift.
I just keep thinking open meeting law flashing in my face, and then transparency. If we want to make sure we don't get anything lost, nor transparency and open meeting law.
I
we should
agree.
follow that.
I
for
agree,
sure.
and
'Cause
we,
it did say it's supposed to follow that, yeah.
so
Do
the
you
live,
guys have a, I'm sorry, like, this might just to help, do you guys have, a page on the city website, like
Yes.
dedicated to you guys?
Yes.
Because it might be not a bad idea to post a lot of this information
Mhm.
to lead people to, because I think it is, like, not a lot, I mean, open meetings law, I don't think is a layman's thing. And, to explain a lot of this stuff so people get it, because I know what you're talking about, and I think a lot of it's contradictory, not that you guys are being contradictory, but it comes off as contradictory to the general public. So it might not be a bad idea to kind of give like a one-on-one sort of like breakdown of it.
sure, I can ask,
If possible.
yeah, I can ask Beth Carlin to actually put the link right on the
And
website.
maybe Elizabeth, that's something we can all have a conversation about what else should be on that website, because we could put quite a bit. I mean, if it's the portal by which the community has access to the panel and to the working, the work that's being done.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can ask Beth to put the link to the Committee on Open Gov, which is the authority of New York State on open meetings law, and that is very easy to navigate. So I'll make a note for myself to ask Beth to put that link. Okay.
Hi, I'm Brianna House. And there was kind of like at the last meeting, kind of like a shutdown of, the term defunding the police. And for me, I believe that we need police reform. And I think we're too early in discovery for what the full extent of what the problems are, or to close ourselves off to any methods. It's not saying that we are going to defund the police. It's not saying that we aren't. It's not saying we're trying to abolish. It's not saying any of those things. But I just think that we don't have enough data to really close that off yet. And that's all I have to say about that. And and again, with the survey, we're already showing that, and that's okay. We're all trying to work together. And I'd also just like to say with use of force policy, as a Black woman, the cops being called is always escalating a situation. These are men with guns, men and women with guns. It's always escalating a situation, so I feel like de-escalation is always called for. And I think so that's all I got. So, thank you.
thank you.
Any other members of the public?
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm Joanne Brittner. I live at Lakeview Towers. And I hadn't been to any of these before, but I tried to watch them and I couldn't. The topic that came up tonight, I got really excited, resources for the citizens. And we talked about resources for police, but what about those individuals, those youth that get picked up? And they're not given locations or mental health places where they can access. And why aren't we doing anything for the youth? And the youth can be Black, white, Hispanic, but we're just throwing them into the legal system, and the legal system does what it does, not mental health. So that's what I wanted to say. But one more thing I wanted to say, being at Lakeview Towers, I've seen police there frequently, and the women, they're wonderful. When things escalate, they know how to separate them. They're wonderful. So that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
I'm sorry, I missed your name. Can I get your name again?
Joanne, Joanne.
J-A-N-N-E.
Brittner, B as in boy.
Mm-hmm.
R-I-T-N-E-R.
Thank you so much. Okay, that is going to have to be the end of public comments, 5:15. We need to set our next meeting. So I had a conversation with Beth Garland today, and she thought it would be much better for everyone, the public and in the mayor's office, if we could come up with a set schedule, frequency. So we've discussed Mondays at 4, but I think we really need to set a specific frequency of how often we want to meet. So we either need to decide we're going to meet every Monday at 4, which I think might actually be too difficult, but that's just my opinion.
I thought
Or
we decided 2 weeks ago.
that it was going to be, I thought we decided every 2 weeks, and we did have
Every
this
2
meeting.
weeks, and this was just a meeting because we wanted to get the survey
Okay.
out.
Then let me, I
But then
will,
we should have a working group in between.
yes,
because
I agree.
2 weeks of no activity is no good.
So do we want to then resume what our original schedule was, which
I
means
think
we meet
so.
next Monday, and then it's every 2 weeks after that? Is that what we're agreeing?
Mhm.
All right, so the
And-
next meeting is,
And so for next Monday, we,
25th.
maybe the working group can come up with a distribution plan for the survey.
great. Okay, so our next meeting is August 24th at 4 o'clock. And that one will also be until 5:15, just so we're clear, because the planning board meeting will be at 5:30, and so we need to get off the live stream. So it'll be from 4 to 5:15. Okay,
You said August 24th?
August 24th will be 1 week from today. So we're back on our regular, but, every 2
Regular
week
schedule.
schedule, you bet. Do I have a motion to adjourn? And second by Maxine. Okay, do we have a roll call? Emily? Yes. Yes. Amanda?
Yes.
Why do we have?
Michelle? Maxine?
Yes.
Will?
Yes.
Caprice? Yes. Chief Ritter?
Yes.
And Elizabeth says yes. Our meeting is adjourned today at 5:17. Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna get off this live stream.
I'm listening.
I'm just squeezing around here, I'm sorry.
Are you gonna send out the email for like the working group? Yeah. Okay. Are there particular days or times that work best for you?
So